If you've been planning a design project and never actually starting it, you're not getting close to starting a project. You're just getting more comfortable with not starting it. Every day you open and close a Figma file, there's someone else shipping their work, building their portfolio, and getting better day by day. You can tell yourself that you're preparing, like researching, collecting references, and all that, but you are exactly where you started. And here's the thing, the designers who seem effectively productive aren't more talented than you, they aren't working harder than you. They have just figured out a way to remove the friction that you are still stuck in. See, this isn't another motivation video telling you to push yourself, discipline is everything. No. Let's understand why it is hard to start in the first place and make 6 small decisions that's going to remove the resistance entirely. Once you know them, you'll wonder why you wasted so much time hesitating. As designers, let's first understand the problem very clearly. Starting any design project often feels heavier than it should. You open a design file, stare at the blank page, and immediately the question starts to hit you. Where do I even begin? What if this isn't good enough? What if my idea fails? All these limiting questions. So naturally, instead of starting, you start to prepare. You research, you collect references, you organize your Figma file. It feels productive, but deep down, you know what you're doing. You're basically delaying to get started. And here's why it happens. We think we need clarity before we begin. That if we just prepare enough, just think enough, just plan enough, starting might feel easy. But that's not how design works. You cannot figure out everything in advance in design. It's very uncertain in nature. You cannot know if a layout works until you build it. You cannot feel a flow until you click through it. The problem isn't that you lack discipline. It's that your brain craves its certainty, which, as you know, design does not offer upfront. That uncertainty creates friction. The longer you wait for the friction to disappear on its own, the harder it becomes for you to start. So the real question isn't how do I get motivated? It's how do I remove the friction so starting feels natural? To answer this question, you need to understand what kind of work design actually is. As you all know, design isn't linear. It's not research, wireframes, UI, testing and done. That's the theory. And theory is just 10% of the work, and the rest 90% is context. Context is everything that the theory doesn't account for. It's the constraints you didn't see coming, the user behavior that surprises you, the stakeholder feedback that shifts the direction of the project halfway through, or the layout that looked good in your head feels off when you actually build it. Design is making decisions inside that context, often with incomplete informations. As I've already told you, you cannot know if a hierarchy is right or wrong unless you see it at scale. You cannot feel a flow until you click through it. And for that matter, you cannot know every edge cases of your product before you start. That's why design feels uncertain. Because it is. When you begin a project, you won't know half of what's ahead of you. You'll second guess yourself. You'll doubt your directions. But that's not a flaw in your process. That's how design actually works. And clarity doesn't come from more planning. It comes from starting and adjusting as you go. One step reveals the next. You build, you test, you learn, and automatically the confusion clears and the path forward becomes obvious. So our goal isn't to eliminate the uncertainty, it's to get comfortable moving through it. And that's where the next part comes in. 6 key decisions that makes it easier to start and easier to stay focused once you've begun. Decision 1. Picture the outcome before you start. Most people start with logic. They list down what they need to do and hope that's enough for them to get moving. But our brain doesn't respond to these task lists. It responds to images that feels meaningful. So visualize your outcome. I'll tell you why it works. Visualization activates your brain's reward system. When you picture the positive outcome, your brain releases dopamine, the same chemical that drives motivation. By doing this, you're creating an emotional pull so that you don't have to rely on your willpower every single time. So the next time before you open a design file, just take 5 minutes to visualize the outcome. Not the finished UI, the deliverables, no. The moment right after you're done. You can picture yourself testing a prototype and watching the interactions flow very smoothly for the very first time. Or imagine a user using your product without any hesitation, very effortlessly, because the hierarchy finally makes sense. And see yourself closing a laptop knowing that you solved a real problem. These images that you create in your head creates an emotional pull, as I've already told you. It shifts you from I need to be doing this, I should be doing this, to I need to see this exist. So you no longer force yourself to start. You're drawn towards creating something that matters to you. Decision 2. Make the first step absurdly small. Ideas feel exciting until you overthink them. The gap between thinking and doing is where a lot of projects die. So shrink the gap. Don't tell yourself I'll design the checkout flow. It's big and abstract. Say I'll open Figma and create a frame. That's it. One action, no one comment went beyond that. The reason it works because big tasks trigger your brain's threat detection system. As I said, for example, design the checkout flow. This feels overwhelming, so your prefrontal cortex stalls. But open Figma and create one frame. This is so small, it bypasses that resistance entirely. Once you're moving, momentum takes over. By doing this, you're not lowering your standards, you're lowering the barrier to entry. Because once you take the first small step, the next one becomes obvious, and the one after that even clearer. Decision 3. Build a start signal your brain recognizes. Motivation doesn't come first, it follows action. That's why rituals matter. A ritual is a small, repeatable action that signals your brain it's time to create. The reason this works because your brain is a pattern recognition machine. When you repeat the same action before working, you create a neural path, a psychological trigger. Over time, this ritual itself reduces the decision fatigue and primes your brain for focus before you have even started. Here are some examples that actually work for designers. Open a project file and spend 3 to 5 minutes reviewing what you've done in the last session. Sketch one idea on paper before touching the computer. Or set a 25 minutes timer and commit to working only until it goes off. The ritual itself doesn't matter. The pattern does. When your brain recognizes a signal, when this happens, design follows. And it starts preparing automatically. Over time, starting stops feeling like a decision. It becomes automatic. Decision 4. Always end with a breadcrumb. Before you close your laptop, write the next small thing to do. Not a paragraph, just one line. For example, next, adjust header spacing. Test mobile navigation behavior. Review contrast on CTA buttons. The reason this works because your brain hates ambiguity. When you end a design session without clarity, you have to start another session with a lot of cognitive load. You have to rebuild your context, you have to remember what you were thinking, and you have to figure out where to go next. But a breadcrumb removes that friction entirely. You won't waste time remembering where you were or what you were thinking. And on top of that, breadcrumb keeps your momentum alive even when you're not working because your brain keeps processing in the background where it knows what comes next. Decision 5. Measure your progress by understanding, not output. Many designers quit not because they are tired, but because they think they're way behind. I think this happens because we measure our progress in deliverables. For example, how many screens did I finish today? But design does not work that way. Some days we'll spend hours exploring ideas, testing different approaches, or reframing the problem. You won't finish anything, but that still counts. See, when you measure your progress by output alone, you're setting yourself up to feeling like you're failing, especially during these exploration phases where nothing is done. But if you redefine your progress as understanding, you validate the messy and non-linear parts of design. This reduces the frustration and keeps you engaged longer. Because you're not just building screens, you're building your understanding. You're recognizing your pattern, you're sharpening your judgments about what works and why. That's real progress. A day spent understanding the problem very deeply is worth more than a week executing the wrong solution quickly. When you start measuring your progress by understanding and not completion, you stop chasing done and start chasing clarity. And that mindset sustains you far longer than speed will ever. Decision 6. Externalize your thinking. Mental clutter is one of the biggest sources of friction. When everything lives in your head, you're just wasting your energy remembering why you made certain decisions instead of focusing on what comes next. So get it out of your head. Journal it. I'll tell you why it works. Your brain's working memory can only hold 4 to 7 informations at once. When you're trying to remember the context, rational, next step, all in your head, you're maxing out your cognitive capacity. Externalizing it frees up your mental space so that you can think clearly instead of just remembering. So keep simple notes as you work. For example, choose layout B, better visual hierarchy. Move CT above the fold, aligns with user scanning patterns. Increase line height, improves readability on mobile. It doesn't need to be formal, it just needs to exist. Because when you externalize your thinking, 2 things happen. First, you clear your mental space for new ideas. Second, you start to notice your own patterns, how you think, where you hesitate, what your instincts tell you. Over time, these notes become the record of how you solve a problem, and that's how you get better, by making your thinking visible. These 6 decisions removes the friction that keeps you from starting. But here's what a lot of designers don't realize until it's too late. Starting is just half the battle. When you finally sit down to work, you open your references, you start researching, and 4 or 5 hours later, you would have looked into hundreds of design. but you haven't created a single frame. You're not stuck anymore, you're just drowning in inspirations with nothing to show for it. And that's costing you more time than starting ever did. And in part 2, I'll exactly cover this. How to research without spiraling, how to explore without getting lost, and how to actually turn all that inspiration into real progress. So if you don't subscribe, you'll miss it. And you'll keep on wasting hours of your time researching when you should be designing. So don't let that happen. Subscribe.